1999 The Podcast is a production of the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more podcasts on movies, comics, and all things pop culture, head to cageclub.me. To contact us with questions, comments, or just to say hi, send us an email at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find me on Twitter at probablyrealjb and Joey at Soulpot. And you can follow the show on Twitter at 1999 The Podcast. To support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. The show is written, produced, and edited by us. Welcome to 1999 The Podcast. I am John Brooks.
And I'm Joey Lewandowski. And John, is this 1998 The Podcast?
We'll get to that. But Joey, how are you today?
I am good, said in German with subtitles.
I do good things well in German with subtitles.
The bag.
That's great. Let me ask you another question. How are you today?
Second time around, a little bit better, but still could be better.
Okay, well, maybe the third time is the charm.
As Mike Manzi, that's his whole podcast is about the final third of this movie.
He should do an episode about the last 20 minutes.
Really, truly.
That'd be great. Well, as you alluded to, today we're going to talk about a movie that technically meets the criteria of our podcast, but that no discussion of the revolutionary, groundbreaking films of 1999 could really be complete without, because while it was released in 1998 in its native Germany, its US theatrical release came in June 18th of 1999. Starring Franke, Potente, Moritz, Bleibtreu, it is the breakout feature from writer-director-composer Tom Tykwer. Today we are discussing Lola Run, better known to US audiences as Run Lola Run. So Joey, what is, if you can do this one, Run Lola Run about?
So Ronnie Dobbs is the most arrested man.
That's a slightly later, that's the sequel starring David Cross.
Do you like Run, Ronnie Run?
Run, Runny Run is one of the funniest goddamn movies I've ever seen in my entire life. I had a bootlegged copy of it because it was before it was released on DVD. Because it was like made and then canned, and then nobody saw it for a long time. But I BitTorrented it in like 2002, in this very, very poor quality transfer, and I cried my eyes out with laughter watching that movie.
Okay,
I love that movie quite a lot. Because I'm also obviously a giant Mr. Show fan. But anyway, different movie.
So we're not watching the Ronnie Dobbs, Terry Twilstein vehicle Run, Ronnie Run.
No, we're not.
No, so Run Lola Run stars the German names as Lola and Manny, and Lola's boyfriend Manny seems to be this sort of constant fuck up who is tasked to deliver $100,000 as a test for his new crime boss. He leaves the bag on a train, and it's up to Lola and Manny to replace the money, something that tries to happen 3 times over the span of 79 very brief minutes. I love how short this movie is.
It is almost a perfect length for a movie. There is no time wasted, and it doesn't feel too short and doesn't feel too long. I was surprised when I rewatched it how short it is, but when I rewatched it, I'm like, yeah, no, it's perfect. It's exact right length.
Here you are 2 weeks ago complaining that Office Space at 89 minutes is too long, but here we are at 79 minutes basically. Like, this is the sweet spot.
Yeah, because it really isn't length that matters to me. It's what
it's about the motion in the ocean. We know.
It's what you do with it. I love the director's cut of Return of the King as well. That is an infinite number of hours long, but I still love it. So while Run Lola Run was technically just the 150th highest grossing movie of the year.
That's lower than Office Space, right? That was like 135 or something?
So our last movie, Office Space, was 134th, earning just shy of $11 million, while Run Lola Run earned $8.25 million. However, this is an important caveat. At 1,740 theaters, Office Space played in more than 10 times as many theaters as Run Lola Run.
Okay.
172.
Okay.
So consider as well that most of the top 10 of that year played in at or around 3,000 theaters, except number 10, Blair Witch, which played at 2,500. And that the first film on the list to play in less than 2,000 is number 48, Life is Beautiful, which was released in 1998 and played on 1,136 screens. So for the sake of argument, if you just assume it played on roughly the same number of screens as even Office Space and multiply its box office by 10, Run Lola Run would have been the 25th highest grossing movie of the year. So yeah, it made a pretty good profit on its very, very small budget, which was $1.75 million.
Okay.
Worldwide, it made $23 million. So that's, again, good return on investment.
Sure.
For sure. The style and themes of Run Lola Run share a lot in common with the first film we covered on the podcast and one of your favorites, The Matrix. Beyond just the superficial, like a telephone serving as the catalyst for the plot, both films borrow as much from the kinetic pace and jump cut editing of music videos of the era as they do from the styles and techniques of traditional filmmaking. And in many ways, Run Lola Run is a music video. Tykwer co-wrote the film's legendary techno soundtrack alongside frequent collaborators Johnny Klimek and Reinhold Heil. And almost all of the film's brief 80-minute runtime, no pun intended, plays out like a spliced-together music video for each of the score's tracks. And even while the film presents a very logical, straightforward narrative, while at the same time subverting normal storytelling formats by showing the same story 3 different ways. And on that note, like The Matrix, Run Lola Run plays with the philosophies of determinism and free will, casting everything that happens within the framework of a game and suggesting a participatory universe in which we all impact reality through our decisions. But unlike The Matrix, all of the technical wizardry is behind the camera. This is a cyberpunk film set in the present day of the late 90s without even the tiniest bit of futuristic technology in even a single frame. Run Lola Run's futurism is all about the way the movie, also like Fight Club, is experienced more than it is watched. Would you categorize this movie? I think of it as a cyberpunk film.
So we just, for Lottery Pod, How to Win the Lottery, a book club podcast, available now wherever you get your podcasts. In the next, month or so, we will be releasing episodes on both Snow Crash and Neuromancer.
Yeah.
So I'm not wildly familiar with cyberpunk outside of those. And those are 2 novels that, I appreciate and understand the impact of, but I don't particularly enjoy. And we will, if you want to listen to those episodes, you can hear why. Just not really my cup of tea. I think it's I don't know that it's cyberpunk. I think it's maybe punk. And I don't know that I think it's hard to define. I think this movie, for what it is dripping with style. I think it's aesthetic. I think it depends on how you define that term or the genre or the movement or whatever. I don't think I would call it cyberpunk. I would probably call it I don't know, an avant-garde. I also don't really like genre. I'm never in any medium. I'm not good at genre. And I think it's, I understand the value of it too, but I don't, I don't know. I have a hard time reconciling that phrase and books like Snow Crash and Neuromancer with this. Cause I think it's very firmly set in modern day. It's not some futuristic, whatever. It feels like it is, but it's not, right? So it's maybe influenced by, but not actually an example of the thing.
It's the framing of it that I think sort of makes it cyberpunk. That Tykwer is kind of creating a video game here, right? That the characters live in, including a reset button where you die in one run and then you hit reset and you start again. And while, again, nothing on screen kind of fits the cyberpunk motif aside from the way that Lola looks, right? That she looks very much like a William Gibson character in her hair and the Doc Marten boots and all that sort of thing. It's the movie itself is cyberpunk, not what's happening in the movie. It's a very interesting. It reminds me a lot of Blair Witch in a certain way, and that it's trying to do something by making the minimalism of what's actually on screen kind of part of the game.
Well, I think another way to is sort of to say that in a sense, and I don't know that this is necessarily inherently cyberpunk, but just like Snow Crash and Neuromancer both influenced a billion things that came after it, right? Both of them also directly influenced The Matrix, which we both love. But I feel you look at what this movie did, and there are so many imitators and copycats, both good and bad, but also Majora's Mask, the Legend of Zelda game. Is this they took the premise of this, and I feel it's
Very literally. Yeah.
influential in the way that it's doing a thing and being like it's setting out to blaze a path,
Hmm.
either intentionally or unintentionally, like, hey, let's do something different. And people are like, oh, I can, like, I just watched in the last 3 months like the Simpsons episode Trilogy of Error, which is the Run Lola Run sort of knockoff, not really knockoff, but like it does this thing. And so I think the trisecting of a story, or the repetition of a story, um
Yeah.
I think it's inherently unique, in because I don't think, had this sort of thing been done before? I mean, like, there's obviously, like, you know, Rashomon, where, like, you see the same story told from different perspectives, but, like, this is 3 different takes on the same day.
Right. And it's not different perspectives. It's the same story 3 times with slight variations to get different endings. In much the same way that like a choose your own adventure novel would
Mhm,
be.
mhm.
Um,
Which I have questions about, like, how it works in universe, but I think we can talk about that with our guest.
right. I think we should. Yeah. I guess like what I would say is like the Matrix is firmly cyberpunk in my mind, at least in terms of like it's just like
Yes, I would agree.
its presentation, right? If not necessarily, I think its ideas do things that cyberpunk doesn't necessarily do, but like it's a cyberpunk movie, and that this movie and the Matrix have so much in common that it's hard for me to even like not think they're in the same basic genre.
Well, I think the other thing that, like, is worth noting here is that Tom Tykwer and the Wachowskis would team up to make one of my all-time favorite movies in Cloud Atlas. So, like, I don't think it's any surprise that, like, their aesthetics and what they're into would gel so much that they're like, hey, let's take this thing that, like, seems impossible to adapt and turn it into, like, an absolutely beautiful movie that, like, should not work as well as it does. Like, I think that their interests in the way that they tell stories visually are going to come together to, like, create something even greater.
Well, you just brought me to my next point, which
You're
is what
welcome.
happened to Tikver following this movie. He used it as a springboard to go on to other mainstream, though still pretty avant-garde and cutting-edge stuff. He'd already been a successful filmmaker in his native Germany. His 1997 thriller Winter Sleepers was a big critical hit, and kind of a cult classic. And he went on to collaborate with the Wachowskis in films, like you said, like Cloud Atlas, but also the Netflix series Sense8, as well as serving again with Klimek as composer for Lana Wachowski's The Matrix Resurrections, about which you can hear us and Mike Manzi talk about on Keanu Club from about a year or so ago. In addition to its indie success, the film became beloved over time, especially with young audiences, for its iconic visual style and soundtrack. And it was also a big hit with critics at the time. It has a Rotten Tomato rating of 93 with a 90 audience score, and a Metacritic rating of 77 with an 8.5 audience score. And few reviews fail to mention music videos and MTV.
Sure.
Among its biggest cheerleaders were Entertainment Weekly's Owen Gleiberman, who gave the film an A and began his review by writing, quote, "Run Lola Run is a madly spinning top of a movie. One that I suspect will eventually be regarded as the art house smash that heralded the 21st century. The ferociously infectious, candy-colored, jump cut style of Run Lola Run is pure propulsive pop. The movie would have been unthinkable prior to the age of MTV and Tarantino, Oliver Stone, and Trainspotting. Still, for all its pulsating, razor-edited exuberance, the film is ultimately as unique as its sources. In its speed and elegant hyper-precision, its celebration of action as devotion, it's a new-style girl-power daydream." And Film.com's Gemma Files, who wrote that Run Lola Run, quote, "is the kind of thing Franz Kafka might have dreamed up had he only had access to a daily dose of MTV."
Okay. Okay.
And and sure, why not David Edelstein, who wrote, "It's both fractured and fluid with a helter-skelter syntax and a ceaselessly infectious backbeat. Beyond that, it's a blast." So not very many critics had a lot of bad stuff to say about Run Lola Run. There's some positive reviews who were like, yeah, it's great and it's a lot of fun and it's very cool, but it's kind of empty. And then there's some who are a lot sort of more harsh on it. The two biggest detractors I could find were the AV Club's Joshua Klein.
Ooh, is that our first AV Club reference in this podcast?
I think it might be our second,
Okay.
but I haven't done too much AV Club stuff. But he said, "quote It may be all Euro trash flash, but it's not often that a film packs this much visceral punch." So like it's fun and it's good, but it's sort of empty and trashy. But the most scathing is the Washington Post's Stephen Hunter, who wrote a late review of the film. His review came out like a month after the film did, beginning with, quote, "Hasn't someone argued that the best way to kill something is to overpraise it? If so, then Run Lola Run is in danger of suffocation by the weight of excess adjectives. This little German film turns out not to be good so much as different, which is not the same thing at all. Sitting through it is a pure shot of giggle gas, but 2 hours later you realize you haven't seen much, you've learned less, and you're hungry for a movie." He goes on to describe the movie alternately as, quote, "extremely clever," and also, quote, "simple-minded," so he may have just been in a mood.
Sounds like it.
Those aren't the same thing. Either way, it is one of my favorites, and I can't wait to talk about it further. So, Joey, who's our guest today?
Our guest today is video editor and captain of the Run Lola Run the Jewels Run video. We'll get into that on the episode. Jacob Meirovich.
We'll be right back with Jacob.
Wait, before we start, should we say how? Can you say your last name for us? Because I said it like 5 different ways just to make sure that's...
Sure. It's Meirovich.
Oh, fuck. That's not one I did.
Damn it.
No.
That's the one we didn't do.
It's okay. Everyone gets it wrong. You know what?
Okay,
I won't
I will say it
Meirovich.
again. Okay. Jacob Meirovich. There you go, John. Use that.
There we go. That was perfect.
I'm gonna edit that back in. That's fine. Yeah, we were like, is it Meirovitz or yeah, the one we
end
did not
was the
think
tricky
of.
part. It was not the beginning.
Yeah.
We got the beginning
Yeah.
wrong, but I thought the end was going to be the hard part, and it turned out that was the easy part. So
Yeah.
I should have asked you an email. Can you like phonetically pronounce it for us? So we can
Oh,
do
no
the
worries.
intro,
I get
but
that all the time.
you're
I'm sure you do.
fine.
we like to pronounce things the right way on the show, or at least
Mhm.
I do. So anyway, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you. We invited you, actually Joey found you, so I'm
Mhm.
gonna let him
I
kind
do
of
work on
explain
here every
why.
once in a while. It's not all
He
John.
does. He does.
I've said before, I love this podcast because like almost every other podcast I've done, well, no, that's not fair to Mike. Half the podcasts I do with Mike, I do the work. Half he does the work. All the ones I do with Joe, I do the work. And so it's nice. And like the ones that I do, and also Lottery Pod, I do the work too. And so it's nice to have an active, ongoing podcast where I basically do nothing. And so we were like, oh, who we're going to have for this Run Lola Run episode? And we thought maybe bring back Jen, who was just here last episode for Office Space. I'm like, wait a minute. I won't shut the fuck up on these episodes about Racer Trash, how much I love Racer Trash, how they waived like 3 movies from 1999 already that we've covered, and I keep talking about it, and I'm like, I remember months ago in a Discord I'm in, someone saying, hey, I have this idea for Run Lola Run the Jewels Run. Does anybody want to do a segment for it? And I'm like, okay, put that in my back pocket. And then about a month or 2 ago, they aired it on SegFest's Twitch, and I was just like, wait a minute, don't really know, but I have access to the guy who captained that. And so I DM'd Jacob, and you were like, I would love to. And I'm like, cool, John, you do the work now. And so I pass the buck once again.
All of that's a true story. This idea of someone else doing the work on a podcast sounds great, Jay. I gotta figure that out somehow. I gotta do a third podcast where someone else just does all the work.
Yeah, maybe you and Joe too can do one. He'll edit, which means that like episodes won't.
I don't want that to happen. I mean, I love Joe and everything, but I don't.
One of our listeners today said, thank y'all for the work. And Joe was like, I don't do any work. Just thank Joey for that. I'm like, yeah, come on, Jason. Jeez. No, by now. You've listened to how many episodes of our show? Anyway. I do want to talk to Jacob later. I don't think we should lead with the Run Lola Run the Jewels and the Racer Trash at all, but I do want to, unless you want to start it, this is, I don't want to say it's your show.
I feel like a lot of our listeners have no idea what you're talking about, and I think it would be a good idea to explain like exactly what that is, and this whole like I know you've talked about Racer Trash on a couple episodes in the past. There was like 2 in a row, and we were all like, yeah, okay. But I don't think it's a niche thing. Obviously, it's a cool thing, but it's difficult to explain. So, Jacob, do you want to kind of explain your history with that whole sort of little subgenre of editing and having fun with existing films and all that stuff?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I'm not like, there's probably other people who are into this stuff that know a lot more about it than I am. I'm not the greatest historian, but I can try my best. So I kind of like Joey, I kind of came to Racer Trash as like a fan. where I think first found out about it in like 2020. I should first explain what it is. I get ahead of myself. So
That's fine.
it's a lot of, I'm sure as Joey knows, it's a lot of things to explain, and you're trying to explain it as simply as you can.
It's really simple, and also like there are layers to it, and it's
Yeah.
Like this movie. Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. But Racer Trash was an editing collective that started during the pandemic, where a group of editors, filmmakers, artists got together, and they would divide movies up into segments, and one editor would tackle one segment, and they could do whatever they want. They could give it weird visuals, they can put music over it, they can make it a joke, they can make it dramatic. And then they started hosting these on Twitch for charity. And slowly over time, like the audience grew, the collective of editors grew. Like pretty much with every movie, there'd be like one or two new editors. So that's kind of where I came to it, where I was a fan. I think I first found out about it through What the Film Fest, which is held in Toronto but was online for 2020 because of the pandemic, and that's where I think they played Vapor Mario Bros. And like pretty much instantly I was like oh, I gotta know, like literally I finished watching the movie on Twitch, and I emailed right, because during the pandemic I had a Discord group for like movie nights, and I was always trying to find like unique stuff to show. And
Yeah.
as soon as I finished the movie, I literally emailed Racer Trash, and I was like, hey, like what can I do to like show this to everybody? Like I explained like, oh, I have a film club, I want to show this, I need to show this. Secretly I just kind of wanted to watch it again. But
Because that was the thing, that, like, just to interject really quick, is that they would show it on Twitch, but they wouldn't upload it anywhere. And now it's all on Internet Archive.
Right.
You can download it all. There's a lot on the Vimeo, and like it's out there now.
yeah.
But for a while, it was like it was part of, like I was explaining to John before,
Mhm.
Jake, that like it was the live experience. Like you can watch, like if
That's
you
cool.
download it, you can watch it. But like it's part of it is being in the chat and like saying the
Yeah.
things as it comes on,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the community element sort of can't be undersold.
Mm-hmm. It's very like The Room or like Rocky Horror, where you can watch it on your own.
Yeah.
But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's like when you watch with other people and you're all reacting, and there's like one person who's new, and they're like, "What is this?" And then you have people like trying to explain it to them. It's like it was a very unique experience. So eventually, Racer Trash did come to an end, and a lot of, I think, fans of Racer Trash and some past editors wanted to keep going. So I think even though it's no longer called Racer Trash, there's still lots of, I guess, Racer Trash adjacent kind of remix movies coming out. I was a part of one for Twister. And then from there,
Awesome.
I kind of like emailed a bunch of those editors. I was like, hey, I have like this idea for Run Lola Run. Would you want to do that? And the idea was Run Lola Run, the Jewels Run. So Run Lola Run, but with only Run the Jewels music. And that premiered in September. And we're still doing stuff. So I feel like it's kind of, hopefully it's kind of become like its own thing that could last a while. Yeah.
Because what's interesting and sort of fascinating about it is that like everything they were doing was very like if you know how to do video editing, you know how to like add effects to stuff, like anybody could have done it, but it felt like I came to it very late, like mid 2021. Like basically the first, like when they showed all of their stuff in these 4 very long retrospectives at the end of 2021 and beginning of 2022, like that's when I saw most of it for the first time. So like I was very, very late to the game. But like what if you knew how to do video editing, like you could do it. Like it wasn't like they weren't like gatekeeping, like you could just do it. But like it felt like no one did. And then they sort of, went away. They kind of, I think they just overworked themselves because they did so many features in such a short amount of time. Like it was sort of dormant for a while. And like a whole bunch, like a couple different groups of people were like, well, why don't we just do it? And so now there's like 3 or 4 different, like kind of, I don't know if it's like main accounts almost. Like there's like Segfest and there's, oh god, like there's the like the Magnolia Remastered guys are doing a lot. Like it's all like similar, like there's all sort of like crossover, crossbreeding.
Yeah, there's
whatever.
lots of like overlap. It's kind of like, yes, it's like separate groups, but it's all very much like one big group, because like Rocky, I just helped edit Rocky Horror, and in that group we have like some Racer Trash people. We have some people who were part of like one of the like Dream Video division, which is like kind of the big one now. And then like, you know, like, and some people who worked on Magnolia also worked on Rocky Horror. So like it's yes, there's groups, but it's just kind of like a growing community right now.
And if you just go on, you can go vimeo.com/racertrash, or you can like look on, there's probably clips on YouTube and stuff like that, but it's a lot of just like this sort of chill wave aesthetic, like the 80s and 90s kind of like hyper saturated colors. And, like Jacob was saying, you can sort of do anything you want with it, either make it more serious, less serious, whatever. But it's just, you're making the movie your own. And I think that's something that's like fascinating about like taking existing narratives and reshaping that in a way, I think is really kind of empowering and interesting and fascinating. And like, I think it came from like, they weren't, people weren't making movies in the pandemic. And all these people, for the most part, were like editors who worked on like Hollywood stuff and like, productions and stuff. And they didn't have anything to do. And they were like creatively frustrated, and they just made things out of existing things. And I think it's just a fascinating idea. And, I love to see it living on.
Mm-hmm.
I also think like one of the things I said to Joey was in watching your edit of the movie. One of my favorite things, I don't know if it's like if you did this specifically or somebody else who was involved, but the scene when Lola is talking to Manny on the phone the first time, and all the subtitles are just like completely absurd.
Yeah, that's
and like
Ben did that.
Okay.
Yeah, he's very funny. Yeah, sorry, continue.
No, it's very funny, but it's also kind of it's got this like weird meta quality as well, because one of the things about this movie, and we'll talk more about the actual movie momentarily, but one of the things about the movie that is legendary is that both the dub and the subtitles are terrible in English. It's just a bad translation. And I remember watching that and thinking it was, both a very funny sort of reimagining of what they're saying, but also like it doesn't change the movie in any meaningful way, because like it's just basically like a random conversation that's very intense about basically the same plot line, and then just a bunch of nonsense about like, and then he gave me this bag of shiny things, and and I used my like airport parking skills to park the cars the right way, and I'm like, yeah, you might as well have those as subtitles. It doesn't change anything. I think that's really cool, because it's not just like cinematic shit posting, it's also doing this thing where it's like commentarying on something sort of technical about the movie in a way that's like entertaining and fun.
And I think what's also cool about both this movie and like the Racer Trash thing is that like it's a lot of visual storytelling. And I think you could watch this movie without subtitles. Like, you don't need to know what they're saying to like appreciate or understand the movie. I think it's just like once you get it going, it's just like, oh, okay, like this is just what we're doing. And like it resets and keep going. The last point I want to make, and then Jacob, you could talk about Racer Trash as much more you want, but I do want to say that the guy who plays Manny played Gray Ghost in Speed Racer, which is where the phrase Racer Trash came from. So there's a distinct connection.
I didn't even know that.
Oh, wow. Even closer than I thought. Wow. Okay.
So
that's
is.
I guess that because Tom Tykwer does work with the Wachowskis, right?
Yeah,
so I feel like that.
Yeah.
Tykwer. Sorry, I should have looked it up before, but yeah,
that's okay.
Hey man, we can't say your last name either, so it's fine. I know. You're allowed to.
Okay, I'm allowed to make one mistake.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like just maybe this could like segue into talking about the movies, but one of the reasons why I chose Run Lola Run was because you do have kind of like that form breaking narrative. And one thing I always loved about the Racer Trash movies is that they're essentially kind of what you were saying, John, where they're taking a pre-established story and characters and ideas and themes, and they're kind of contorting it in a new, unique way. And that's kind of what Run Lola Run does with its story. And I was like, oh, that kind of relates to this. So that's one of the reasons why I chose it. And also because I thought the name was very funny.
Well, that's like, that was the other thing that like, there's certain things that like Racer Trash did that I was just like, You've Got Nails. It's like, did you really want to mix up You've Got Mail, or you're just like, you like the idea of doing Nine Inch Nails over You've Got Mail because it sounds
Did you
funny.
think of like Run Lola Run DMC Run? Because like that would also be kind of great.
Oh,
maybe that's
that could have fit. Maybe that'll be like the sequel. I don't know. But like literally the name kind of, because one of some of the editors hold like a movie night every Monday. And people will like make little kind of miniature segments just like 5-minute things just so they could show before the movie in a pre-show. And I think
Yeah.
one of the themes for one of the movie nights was like circles. Because I think we were showing the Endless or something like that. And then, so
Great
I was like
movie.
on a walk, and then I was, oh yeah, I love the Endless. But I was like on a walk, and Run the Jewels came, and I think I was thinking of Run Lola Run, because that's, you know, circular narrative. And then Run the Jewels came on, and it was literally just like that, you know, like lightning hitting, where it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, Run Lola Run, the Jewels run. And then I came home and I started editing it, and just kind of was like, oh, I got to include this scene, or I have to include this shot, or I have to include this song. And then it got to the point where it was like 20 minutes long and I wasn't finished. And I was like, the day before I had to send it in, I was like, you know what? I feel like this could be a feature length thing. So that was kind of like what got me going on trying to figure out who would want to be interested in working on this.
That's interesting. It's funny because like you telling that story, I happen to know that like the inspiration for this movie was that Tom Tykwer was literally just imagining a woman with red hair running down the street, and like that's where the whole inspiration for the movie came from. So it's even more basic than like your jolt of inspiration there. And I think it's really interesting too that like one of the things you mentioned was the way that like the playing with narrative idea, and the way that this movie is sort of like sort of bucks traditional narrative storytelling, but at the same time like is also very straightforward in its narrative storytelling, in that it has a beginning, middle, and end, but the beginning, middle, and end are the same story 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And like it makes perfect sense. It's not confusing, but it's also sort of defying the rules. Like it's defying expectation, but not in a way that's kind of deliberately trying to confuse. Like it's not Primer, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not like you have to
Mhm.
watch it really carefully to make sure you know what you're seeing. And I do feel like there's kind of like, I love cutting edge filmmaking and I love experimentation and all that sort of thing, but I also love people who still care about the audience being entertained and engaged, and like staying sort of within that. And I think this movie lives in that sort of space so perfectly. And when I was watching your cut, I was like, I mean, a lot of it's just completely insane. And I'm like, what the fuck am I watching? But I'm also just like, the whole time I'm just sort of like smiling, because I'm like, I really just like the creativity here, and sort of the way that someone, you know, you like saw one of these scenes and thought, I'm going to do this with it. I'm going to do this with it. And like, this is how I'm going to sort of, you know, remix and reinterpret it. And I think there's something that's like really, it's a really admirable kind of quality about that it's like you're still thinking about other people enjoying it while also like being a little bit insane, right? And I think that's a cool approach.
No, yeah, definitely. I think that's like, I love Run Lola Run. I mean, I love long movies, but it is nice that Run Lola Run is
One of them.
like an hour and 15-16 minutes long, and you can kind of just
Depends
like,
on who you ask. Yeah, if you count the credits it's 80, if you don't it's
yeah,
76.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like I like when I first saw it, I was like obsessed with it, and I would just be like, "Oh, I have like an hour and a half. I'll just throw Run Lola Run on again." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because it's so quick.
Hell yeah.
And like you're in it. Like within the first, you know, as soon as like she runs out the door, it's like you're in it, and before you know it, the movie's over.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that then, because let's talk about how you came upon this movie. So you are our second guest in our 17th episode, who was not, I think you were not born right when this came out. You
No, I
came into the
was
world with this movie intact.
-3.
Yes?
Yeah, I was -3 when this came out.
I think you might be our youngest guest. So that's interesting. So you've never lived in a world without Run Lola Run. And all right, so then like how did you encounter this movie the first time?
And when?
And
So
when? Yeah.
when
you were 2.
My first year of film school, so 2 years ago, it was assigned as, I think we were doing
cool.
world cinema for like a week. And
I
it was
love
assigned
this
as
story already.
yeah, it was assigned as one of the screenings, and it was really great. Not just because of the movie's quality, but because like I think until that point, I don't remember exactly what we screened, but it was pretty much all like period dramas, and I enjoyed some of that stuff. But like when you watch 6 movies in a row, that's like, like when you have to watch like The Godfather next to like Schindler's List next to The Shine, like all these like big dramatic movies that are amazing, obviously, you start to not feel happy. But then you get to watch something like Run Lola Run, and it just kind of stood out, especially because, not that American film is bad in any way, but it's Run Lola Run is just this completely different kind of approach to film, that I feel like was kind of like, I don't want to make an ass out of myself and be like, this is what happens historically in the 90s, which I was not alive. But it feels like it's kind of one of those films that without something like this coming out and kind of getting that audience, you probably wouldn't have like the success of other kind of foreign films that also not so much play with the form, but have their kind of unique cultural perspective on maybe ideas that American cinema and Western cinema have kind of beaten into the ground.
Yeah.
I'm not saying if Run Lola Run didn't come out, something like Parasite wouldn't be successful, because Parasite's also an amazing movie. But
yeah,
I feel like definitely that notion of like world cinema wouldn't be as strong without something like the foundation that Run Lola Run built. And again, I'm not saying that because I might, some of my film school friends might listen to this podcast, so I don't want to make a statement and get like an angry text
you'll get roasted by your film nerds.
Yeah. Like I don't want to be like, yeah, actually world cinema started in the 90s.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, well, as someone who was alive at the time, I can tell you that I think your point is incredibly insightful. I think that because independent and foreign films had existed obviously before the 90s, right? And that is not what you're saying. But as someone who lived through the 90s, I can tell you that like Pulp Fiction was a turning point for the viability of independent film. And Run Lola Run was one of the landmark foreign films that had a huge sort of cult young generational audience in America. And I think that trained people like me to be far more receptive to a movie like Parasite than we may have been otherwise, right? Because I'm in my 40s and I saw this as a teenager, and yeah, I think you're spot on. Like I really, really do. I don't think I get what you're saying. I don't think you're overstating the case. I don't think you're saying that this movie like made foreign films exist. So don't roast him over that. But I think that's a really, really insightful point. I have to say.
Thank you.
So Joey, let's talk to you about your first experience with Lola Rent.
So, like almost every other episode of this podcast, this was one that I saw among, like what Jacob was saying. I'm just like, I'm going to watch all the movies. But I was on, this is honestly one of the greatest stretches of movies I think I had ever. I mean, there might be better ones in there. I don't know. I'm just looking at the ones, the little clusters. Because like Jacob, I would write down, like before Letterboxd was a thing, I just wrote down, or before I knew about Letterboxd, I just wrote down every movie I saw in Excel starting in college.
Oh, yeah. That was
and I just
me.
like,
yeah.
Eventually put it.
Literally, when I was like 13, because I started using IMDb when I was like 15, I had like just a piece of paper and I would just add movies to the list of things. Yeah. And it got to like an unruly amount.
I kept all my ticket stubs for a long time. So I'm not
and then like,
I
started going to Draft House and they did like the receipt ticket, like the paper. I'm just like, I can't keep this. And then like, then that opened me up to free me. Like when I had A-List for a while, I was just like, oh, it's all digital. It's fine. I don't really care. But I still have like, years worth of ticket stubs, like hundreds of them in a little box somewhere. Anyway, so I listed them all in Excel. And so here is the stretch of movies leading up to Run Lola Run that I saw for the first time. Synecdoche, New York, which we talked about, I'm sure, when we talked about being John Malkovich. In Bruges, fucking perfect movie. Dark City. This is all for the first. This is all for the first time. This is like over the span of probably a week.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well,
Alien, the original Alien.
Jesus.
The Lives of Others, which rules. and then Run
Yes.
Lola Run. Like that is, I almost can't pick 6 better movies in a row, and that's all movies that I saw like with nothing in between, all for the first time. Like I can't, and I was probably 20 or something. And I'm just like
The guy who plays Lola's maybe dad is in The Lives of Others.
that movie's so good. They're all those movies are
It's
so
amazing.
good. Like there's not a
Yeah,
clunker
yeah.
among them. But man, oh
Yep.
man, I love all 6 of those movies, and
Mhm.
yeah, like this movie's great. So. What about you, John? Did you see this were you in one of the 270 or 270 theaters?
I was indeed in one of the 172.
So Jacob, if you have not gathered yet, John is old as heck and saw most of these movies in the summer in Seattle. And I have seen basically none of them until I was in college, except for like a handful or whatever. But that's like sort of how it goes. But John has much more, strong bona fides for 1999.
I saw this in an art house theater in Seattle. I was so excited to see this movie. I'd been reading a lot about it.
How did you hear about it? Like how do movies like pre-ish internet? Like how do you hear about a movie that is like this obscure?
So 2 things. One was I think I've mentioned in the podcast before that I was a subscriber to Premiere Magazine in the 1990s, and this movie was a big hit in film festivals, and there was a bidding war for it. It's actually a funny story that like the guy who was running the sort of foreign film what do you call it, acquisition department of Miramax passed on this movie, and when Harvey Weinstein saw what a huge hit it was, I think he fired him, and he was like furious and like, whatever, Harvey Weinstein sucks and he's in prison for the rest of his life, so fuck him. But like so this was, I remember reading about this as a sort of buzzed about movie in Premiere, and Ain't It Cool News also did a lot to promote this movie at that time. There's a lot of their critics had seen it and was saying how amazing it was, and it was the aesthetic of it too that I was like, I saw the images of like Franke Potente with the red hair, and I'm just like, oh, everything about this just sounds awesome. And I dragged my friends, I think 3 of my friends, to see it at this like art house theater one like Saturday afternoon in Seattle. They loved it, and it was such a awesome experience. I was such an evangelist for this movie when it came out. I forced everybody I knew who had the option of seeing it somewhere to go see it. I bought it on DVD as soon as it came out. I showed all of my college roommates like this movie several times over. I loved it, and I hadn't seen it in years until I rewatched it this week, and it is everything I thought it was. Like it is like there's some stuff that I saw in it that is kind of new. I think I have a better appreciation for how bad the subtitles are now. It doesn't matter that much because the way the story is told, I think, again, like it sort of supersedes all of the dialogue. But man, it's great. It still holds up. It's just so still fresh and like and just it deals with philosophy in a way that is both thorough and compelling, but not like doesn't bog it down, and it's just fucking great. Like it's such a great movie, and it's so, again, it's 80 perfect minutes. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It does everything that it's supposed to do and gets out. And I remember, like, I'm glad Jacob said what he said about like when he saw it, because I remember seeing it and I was like, I hope in like 20 years this is a movie that like film students have to watch for like foreign film class. And lo and behold, here we are to this day. So let's talk about like why we love this movie so much beyond it's just fucking cool and and interesting. Jacob, is there an element of this movie that like is the thing that really grabs you and holds on, or is it just sort of the whole shebang?
I mean, it's definitely the whole shebang, but I think that like what really like I think caught me off guard, especially when I first watched it, because I didn't really know the term for it, but I'm a big like I love like maximalism films.
Yes.
So, and I think that's part of the reason why I was attracted to like Race Your Trash stuff, because that's all that stuff is like in your face and loud. But
yeah,
like Run Lola Run was definitely like I remember like just from the opening of like the whole like you have that shot of the clock and it's like such a weird shot, and I was like, what is this? And then you get the weird kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, like the weird nether kind of space where with all the kind of side characters, and you have the security guard
Yeah.
going on, and then he's like, the here are the rules of the game, blah blah blah, and then he's like, he kicks the ball, and then the movie just goes from there. I remember, and then you get that animated bit too, and like after the
Yeah.
animated bit, I'm like, I don't know what this movie's about. Probably about somebody running, but I, for whatever it is, I'm like now 100% like in. And then the movie is just constantly throwing these new kind of like visual techniques and angles and these weird kind of like absurd moments where she like screams and she's able to like break things, like she's like Fiona from Shrek or something, you know, like something like that.
Yeah, right.
And it's just constantly introducing these new ideas, but never like losing, because I feel like that's an issue I have with some maximalist stuff, is sometimes it just feels like, oh, you thought this was like a fun idea and that's kind of where it ends. Run Lola Run really uses them to like develop the character of Lola, and you actually feel for her and you feel for Manny, even though they're arguably maybe not the greatest people.
Right.
But you still care for them, because I feel like, you know, even when Lola has to like run down an animated staircase, you still see her as like a person, and you can still
Yes.
see like your faults within hers.
Yep.
So it's like that combination of like, we're gonna throw everything at the screen and see what sticks, but we're also going to still maintain that character and that development and that emotion that really, I think, made me fall in love with it the first time I watched it.
I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that this revealed about Tom Tykwer as a director and as someone who was not just a really capable director with a distinct visual style and a distinct sort of aesthetic, but someone who could do something that was profound, is that I agree with you that Lola and Manny are both very sort of not necessarily savory characters, but even though this is a movie that is mostly about someone running down a street, somehow he's able, and a lot of it's the performances too, which are all across the board fantastic in this movie, that you get sort of the inner lives of these characters and the backstory of them without really knowing very much about them, which I think is really a remarkable thing to do. But that you have this kind of like, even though they're flawed characters, that you get them and you understand them and you root for them and you see their humanity and their redeemability throughout, right? Even though they're like the first time you see Manny, he's this like fuck up bag man, and you're like still rooting for him and worried about him. And I think that's a really incredible thing to be able to do. Like, it's not easy, and not a lot of filmmakers could pull that off. And yet he does so with so much ease, and it's incredible. Joey, why do you, I mean, obviously this is like your week of the best movies ever made, but
Yeah.
why does this, and especially like within that field, that this stands out to you is pretty remarkable.
Well, I think honestly,
so what do you love about it?
It's probably maybe my least favorite of the six, and that's
Sure.
no fault of its own.
Alien and the lives of others, and
Yeah.
Sure, I get it.
Right, In Bruges is perfect, and Synecdoche is like the craziest movie that's ever been made.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I think it was what Jacob was saying, that I think at a certain point you see enough movies, whether you're seeing them back to back in film school or just on your own or whatever, and you're like, okay, I get it. Like, I appreciate that this is good, but like, I've seen this before. And like, I think that's especially hard. Like, you watch a movie like Citizen Kane now, and you're like, cool, yeah, that's good, but like, I don't get it. Like, I've seen a million movies about it. Like, but it's like, well, you have to think about like the movie that came like right before that, and you compare it, like, it's without that kind of whatever. That whole thing, we don't need to get into that. But I think at a certain point, you're like, I know what a good movie is. Show me something I've never seen before. And I think that something like this, that is all about visual storytelling, it's all just fast paced, it's doing a very simple thing very well, mixing things up, playing on its own story, using elements of the storytelling that like other movies don't even think to mess with. I just think that there's very few things that were like this before. I mean, I think that we were talking a little bit in the intro about like how other things have probably aped this since, like, The Simpsons did it and whatever, but like I just think that it's like it's special and unique, and like I'd rather see something I've never seen before than see something good that I have. And I think that this is both. Like, this is a good thing, but it's also something like I hadn't really seen before.
Yeah.
And I think it's now especially, or maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, like time loop stuff, Groundhog Day stuff really got worn out, and I don't think this is quite that. And I do my only real issue with this is like I don't really understand how the time loop works. I don't even know if they're in a time loop. I don't know. I also don't think that matters. But I think the time loop thing is something that when it's done right, it really works for me. Like I love Happy Death Day. Like I love things that like play with time and characters do things differently. Like we know how it plays out, and so I just think it's cool. I think it looks great. I think it's interesting, and I think it was unique in a way that sort of captured my attention. That like, other than Synecdoche, New York, well, no, that's a very like half those movies are like nothing's ever been like that before. So never mind. I was gonna say like it's a week of like just great movies that are like, but no, they're all weird and perfect and whatever. So yeah, no, I think it's just great. I think it's special and cool and fun, and I think fun can't be undersold.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I think with like Run Lola Run, there's always, because I watched it with my dad last night. He watched part of it. He kind of, not that he got tired of the movie, but he was like,
"Are you sure it's your dad?" I'm just kidding. Did he not get to the confession in the timeline that you're in? Is that?
But he kind of was like, he's kind of like this with some movies where he's definitely like, oh, this is good, but this is a little too much for me. I need to take a break, and I'll just kind of wander off for a bit. But he did.
80 minutes is too much.
Well, he's definitely like a very literal person, and like he got to the first death scene, and he was like, "I don't get it. So is she a ghost now?" And I'm like, "No. So it just kind of restarts." And he was like, "Oh, it's like a time loop movie," and I'm like, "Kinda, but it's not. Like she's not aware of the stuff." And he was like, "Oh, I don't get it."
But she kind of is. But
not like they're never like, Lola never has a line where she's like, "Oh, it's." I mean, she doesn't stop in the hallway and talk to her neighbor and go.
But it's the gun safety is the
real, that she knows. Yeah, but she's never like, "Do you guys know what deja vu is?" And has like that,
deja vu.
Whoa.
The cat.
The cat.
The same cat?
Matrix.
Well, because like if it was a time loop, like she wouldn't trip over the dog in the second one. She would have ironed that out. So like it's just different variations.
But then she irons it out in the third one, though. So that's what's so clever about it, is that it never is explicit that it's a time loop, but she keeps making better decisions each time, and like so does Manny, and they learn something, but they might not have learned it. It just might be a random coincidence. Which
or,
I think
in very 2022 parlance, it's a multiverse where like these are all just playing out, and like this is just like they're because each is more successful than the previous, and like the one that they actually that it works on is the final one. So you have to end on like a high note. I mean, you don't have to, but like I think it's good that it ends on a high note. You don't want to see them succeed and be like, all right, we're gonna run it back. It's like, wait, well, they got away though. Why are we running it back? So it makes sense that they're slightly more successful in the second one than the first one, and there's enough more successful in the final one to get away with it.
Yeah, and I think that like part of like what makes this movie so great to me is that Tom Tykwer is the main character, and he's really good at what he does, and he takes control of this movie and is from the very beginning. Like I know Jacob referenced this early in the episode, but what he said, talking about the way that the characters are introduced in the opening credits, and it's all first names, right? And it's all sort of like setting up the game pieces, right? It's like a game of chess where you got your pawns and your bishops and your rooks, and you're like you're putting them all on the board. And so he's showing you all of these characters and their names in the beginning, and saying like, these are my pieces.
Like so many characters, like almost a comical amount of like, I don't like this movie 75 minutes long. Like, why are you showing us 11 people?
Because they all play on the board, right? They all are characters that you intersect with that affect the outcome of the game, even if they're minor, even if they're pawns that are taken out in the first move, right? That's the idea. And so, and there's that scene where like Lola's running across the plaza, and it's like a checkerboard, right? Like it's or chessboard. It's sort of designed that way. So I love that there's this element where he's like, well, the reason that she dies and is born again is because it's a movie and I can do that. And there's no rules because nobody really dies. And so I can show you how this story plays out in these different ways. And I can give you the happy ending while also giving you the tragic ending and letting you see like the way that story dynamics play out in very subtle ways to like drive us to that point. And I think that's great. Like, because there's no explanation. You don't need an explanation. Like he appreciates the audience enough to be like, I don't have to explain this. It's just like, this is how the story plays out and it's cool and it's great and like, enjoy it. And I'm in control and I'm telling you the story for 80 minutes and it's just 80 minutes. So like, sit the fuck down and don't worry about it. Right. Like I'm not taking up much of your time. And I just love all of that. Like, I think that's just such a rare thing to like have. I love movies. I think we talked about this in The Sixth Sense, right? I love movies where I can like feel the director like sitting me down and like telling me the story and being in complete control. That means a lot to me, and this is one of the, I think, just perfect examples of that.
Did you say where, like, was this his first feature? Like, where did he come from? Like, what had he done before this?
No, he'd done a couple of features before, fairly sort of low profile. But he did a thriller that was.
Is it Winter Sleepers? Is that it?
Yeah, Winter Sleepers, and it's which is a great movie.
It looks like it came out like a year before this.
And then The Princess and the Warrior came out like a year after this, a year or two after this. So yeah, he was not new.
Yeah, because I'm looking at Letterboxd and like, you know, I know it's sort of like an imperfect thing or whatever, but like his first 4 directorial credits, like Winter Sleeper has 1,000 people who saw it or logged it, which is almost nothing, but that's the biggest.
It's a great movie.
And then Run Lola Run has like 150,000 people, so like it's like an order of magnitude above.
Absolutely, yeah.
The only other one of his that I have not seen that I really want to see is Perfume, which I've heard really, really, really good things about.
I like Perfume a lot. Yeah, that's it's an interesting movie. The Princess and the Warrior is good, but not great. But Winter Sleepers is fantastic.
And then of course he did 2 Tom Hanks movies, one perfect and one not very good.
I think just talking about the rest of Tom Tykwer is how you say it. Okay.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I haven't seen much of the rest of his filmography, even though I really want to, and I probably should, considering how much I like Run Lola Run. And I also liked Perfume quite a bit too, but I think he's kind of for some reason, I guess I never clued in that this was his second feature film, because this is like a pretty ballsy kind of like I made like my almost like a Bound to the Matrix kind of leap of like, yeah, I made my like solid little, you know, quaint thriller drama. Let's do high concept next.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's almost like the kind of movie that like somebody who has made 10 movies kind of can't make, because like if you make unless you make 10 wildly different movies, because like at a certain point you just kind of back your way into like, this is how I make movies now or whatever, right? But like if you've only made one, there's no like way you do things. It's like the way I did it for that thing, so I can just do whatever I want with this, which is exciting.
I feel like you could feel that excitement in the movie too, because the film is just packed full of like little gags and little, like, one of the things I loved watching, because I think it's the first loop and she runs by the homeless man with the bag, and like my dad was watching and he literally like lifted off of his seat and he went, hold on, like, and he reacted to it like if you show like a 6-year-old kid like Wile E. Coyote chasing down the Roadrunner, you know what I mean? And like you can just tell that.
Love it.
Tom. Oh, now I have to think about it.
Tykwer. Yeah.
You can just tell that he's like having so much fun with this concept.
Yeah.
And with these characters. I think that's another thing too, because I feel like Perfume is kind of over the top.
Yes.
But it's not. It's a little, I think, grimier than Run Lola Run. Yeah, maybe someone might disagree with me, but I feel like this is the type of story, and these are the types of characters that another filmmaker might make it more sardonic or mean. But he doesn't make everything fun exactly, but he does. I think play with a lot of like schmaltz, which is
Yeah.
another thing I love. Like there's lots
Yeah.
of like the entire ending is just perfect Hollywood ending of like we did it, we saved the day, and
Right,
all the
but
right
it's
things
earned by
happen. Yeah.
two sad endings, right? It's
Mhm.
earned by two tragic endings that you've already gone through, and so like that to me is like what's so interesting about it. Is
Yeah.
like a lot of movies end that way with that like unlikely happy ending. This one makes you earn it, and you
Mhm.
have to like accept two very tragic alternate endings first before you can get to the happy ending at the end, which I think is just a really cool idea.
No, definitely. I love. I've said this lots of times, but it's just because I feel like this happens a lot in film school. And probably not even if you're in film school, if you're just somebody who loves watching movies and you're trying to also make things as well. But
Yeah.
like you'll come across films and it's instantly the type of thing where it's like, oh, this is like another tool in the toolbox. Like this is another like I didn't like when I was 12, I watched Pink Flamingos for the first time, and it was
You were
one of the
12?
Okay.
It's
John,
'cause
that's not abnormal for this podcast. You know that like half of our guests are watching
You're right.
Fucked Up Shit
That
at
is
12 years
true.
old.
That
so.
is true. Yes. It's just I'm used to them watching horror stuff, not Pink Flamingos.
Well,
when they're
to
12.
some people, Pink Flamingos is horror. I will just, you know.
at a certain point my parents just kind of gave up on like kind of control at like at a certain point they were like, as long as you're not watching like I don't know live leak videos, you know. But like just know if you're ever uncomfortable by something you can talk to us. But I watched Pink Flamingos and that was just a case of like and I did get in trouble a couple times at school because there's in all of my I love doing I was that one kid who whenever there was an option to do like a creative assignment for something, I would be like, I'm
Sure.
doing the creative assignment. And there's very much like a before Pink Flamingos Jacob's creative writing and an after Pink Flamingos. And Run Lola Run, I feel like is similar, where you watch it and you're like, oh, I didn't even know you could do things like this. I didn't even know you could make things like this.
Yeah.
But it's just like it's very eye opening. And it's funny that Joey, you watched this the same week as this is another name I can never pronounce, Synecdoche, New York.
You got it, nailed it.
Because like I feel like Charlie Kaufman. I mean, I know that was his first directing thing, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
Or at least very early on. But
Yeah.
he's like, I mean that film maybe doesn't play with as much like visual elements. Like it's still well shot, but it's not like. But this story is almost like maximalism storytelling, where you just have like stories within stories within stories and characters who only relate to each other from like these odd perspectives. I feel like that's a very almost fun double feature of like watching one movie that's just about like tearing like narrative apart and
Mhm.
like kind of like I don't know, almost doing like a not a lobotomy, the what like an autopsy on like storytelling, and then being like, I'm placing the heart in this area of the body where the lungs go, and I'm
Right.
placing the lungs in the brain,
Right.
and like Run
Right.
Lola Run is kind of like that, but almost on like
Agreed.
the visual side or on like the structure side of things. So it's a very interesting kind of like you watched both in the same week, and I was wondering, Joey, like maybe if you're able to remember, I know you said this was like a while ago for you.
Almost certainly not, but I'm willing to field the question.
But like you know, because you kind of I think you said that you watched Synecdoche.
Synecdoche. Yeah.
I'll let John say it from now on. I'll just say the title.
Yeah.
And then
Synecdoche.
you kind of did like In Bruges, Aliens, and then you kind of went to Run Lola Run. Was maybe like your first viewing of it maybe impacted by the fact that you in that span of time you also watched another kind of like
I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think like, I don't think I had a rhyme or reason for why or when I watched anything. It was a combination of getting Netflix discs, because this is pre-streaming mostly. So this is, Jake, when you were like 6 years old. No, but like this was like Netflix discs and like whatever my library had. So I would just like literally like this summer and like the summer before, like I didn't have a summer job. And so I would just go to the library and like rent 5 DVDs and just go home and watch them over the span of like 2 days and then go get 5 more. And so just like whatever they had, I was working through like IMDb lists of like the top 250 films or whatever. And I'm just like, but I wasn't like going in order. So I was just kind of like grabbing whatever. And so I don't think I like, it wasn't intentional. Like I'm gonna watch 2 like mind-bending movies that are going to completely upend the way that I think of narrative. And I honestly don't remember really, like it's weird because like at this point in 2008 or whenever I'm watching these for the first time, maybe 2009, like I'd only probably seen 200 or 300 movies, like ever,
Mhm.
and so like each of them kind of stuck with me more. Now I've seen like 3,000 or whatever the number is on Letterboxd, which is like I don't remember anything, but like I remember seeing Synecdoche for the first time and being like, I don't understand, like how does someone even like conceptualize this? And I think that's what's like I don't think Run Lola Run is inherently, and I don't think it's trying to be like complex. It's just doing a thing that
Mhm.
like other things don't. Like Synecdoche is like, I'm going to do a thing that like no one has not only never done, but like never even thought to do. And like it's a hat on a hat on a hat. And so I don't know if that impacted my viewing of this at all, but I think if I could channel my 20-year-old self, or like I don't think it would have, I think it would have just been like, oh man, like this is wild too. Like I don't think it directly impacted, but I can maybe subconsciously, I don't know. But I remember vividly as I can, 15 years, like 13, 15 years ago, whatever, like Synecdoche, like breaking my brain in a way that this didn't, but not to cheapen, my takeaway of this at all. It's just like, that was like, oh my God, like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's interesting. I think you made a cool point too, where I'd agree with you. Where Run Lola Run maybe isn't playing with like, like we're gonna tear apart like everything you knew about movie making. Because one thing I like about Run Lola Run is that it's very very simple, and we talked a little about that before, but like it's very it's good. It's a very easy thing you could write for a film school essay on, which is what I
Yeah.
did. And I felt very smart writing about like, oh, there's like dangerous stuff and it's all red, like her hair is red, the phone is red,
Oh, we'll talk
you
about
know.
that in a second. But yeah, keep going on that thought. That's my next point. But go ahead.
Like there's lots of kind of very like simplistic, like the whole character motivation. Oh, we need to get a bag of money back, or we need to just get the money because otherwise it's very simplistic motivation, and it's a very simplistic tension, because it's, if we don't get the money, I will be dead, and it's very like, I
Yeah.
100% get that. And that's the type of like simplistic thing that you could just kind of hang on all these like visual ideas and this weird kind of structure, because when you have like that simple thing, pretty much, like my dad was like again, he saw the homeless man with the bag and he was like, that's like the guy, you know
Go
and
back and get that guy. Oh, you can in 2 runs. Yeah.
exactly. And like if the movie was more complicated story wise or character wise than that, it would probably not work as well, because the
Yeah.
thing you'd be hanging all these like visual and narrative uh, 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 subversions onto would be a lot more twisty and bendy and not as straight line and straight through.
What I love about this movie as a highfalutin philosophy movie is that it plays with philosophy and explores philosophy without endorsing philosophy, which I think is really
Hmm.
cool. That it A lot of people have, I mean, if you've taken philosophy courses, right, the idea of compatibilism, which is the idea that like free will and determinism can exist at the same time,
Hmm.
and sort of depends on your perspective on time, which I'm not going to get into here, but like the Wachowskis in the Matrix have a philosophy, and it drives the narrative of the entire trilogy. And here Tykwer is saying like, well, I in the intro, right, he's like, I'm going to play with this idea of like life is a game, and when you play chess, It's the same thing over and over and over again with slight variations in the moves that can determine the outcome of the game. Every chess game is basically the same. Every chess game basically ends the same way, but the way that you manipulate the moves and the characters and the pieces is what determines how the game is played out. And it just sort of is like, what if life is like that? And what if, what if we are living in like several different realities at the same time? And like, it doesn't require you to think deeply about these things. It just sort of is like, this is a cool way of expressing that in a way that's like stylistic and fun and accessible. And I think that the way that he makes those things accessible and makes those things sort of relevant to a MTV audience with the soundtrack and everything else, right? I think that's just, it's just so fucking great. And like I really admire that this movie is aggressively unpretentious while also being incredibly sort of like stylistic and arty. I mean, the fact that you kind of alluded to this at one point earlier, Jacob, but we didn't really talk so much about it, but that it uses 3 different photography styles. So it uses the film style, and then it uses like VHS for the scenes where she's not involved. And then uses like still Polaroid photographs for the like what if scenes or here's what happened next scenes with the characters that she interacts with. And that's a very like straightforward way of kind of breaking up the narrative and showing you different perspectives and sort of like introducing the idea of like a fluidity of time without being fucking super pretentious about it, right? which is a really cool thing. Like, it's a very sort of like film school arty thing to do, but in a way that is like, oh, I get why you're doing this, and it's cool, and like it makes me understand the movie more that you're doing it this way, as opposed to being confusing and like, oh, you're not smart enough to understand this. And like, the way that he lives in that sort of space, I think is so awesome, and one of the reasons I love this movie so much.
Well, I think like what you're saying, he's describing everything as a game. Like, I think that's the point. Like, it's supposed to be fun. Like, he wants you to have fun. He wants you to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And like, he doesn't want he wants to make it easy for you to figure out exactly what's going on. Like, there's no doubt in anybody who's like seen any kind of story in their mind that like, oh, these pictures are like fast forwarding through time. Like, we hear the snapshot, like the shutter click, and we know what that is, even though they never come out. Like, and this is what happened, happily ever after, or not, right? Like, it's all very,
Right.
it's very, again, the visual storytelling works, and just like, hey, like, this is what happens. But, like, you don't have to care about that. Like, we're gonna watch Lola run more. So just like keep our eyes on her, because she's. I also do want to say, friend of the pod, future guest of the pod, Mark Hoffmeyer, who has done so many amazing deep dives for, just on his own that he posted on Reddit, and then also does them for Rotten Tomatoes now. I was like, did you ever figure out how much running Lola actually does in this movie? He's like, no, but I'll do it next for you. So he's going to stay tuned for that, because he will figure out. He's doing some crazy thing. Like, he's always like, I'm watching every episode of Dragon Ball Z. I'm like, why? He's like, for this thing.
Are you talking about distance or time? Like the amount of time she spends running, or like how much she covers?
Distance, because he's done that for Tom Cruise before. He's figured out how far Tom Cruise has run, how fast Tom Cruise has run. There's a really great thing that he did the research on YouTube. If you like Rotten Tomatoes, Tom Cruise filmography or whatever from like earlier this summer, I think. He did a lot of great research about that. So I want to know, like, because she's kind of taking the same path, but it's not always the same path. I'm like, oh, she ran like 8.1 miles or like, whatever. So I want to know.
So one of the things that Jacob, you mentioned earlier was the way, so like, again, in talking about the way that like he uses these kind of stylistic tricks that are accessible and not pretentious, right? So you talked about the red as a symbol of danger, and the way that plays out, not just in terms of the sort of like elements of storytelling in the movie, but also the degree, right, to which they play out. So for Lola, red is the danger color, and for Manny, yellow is, right? So like in the first run, she passes the, so she has the red hair. He gets a red bag, which leads to his death when he robs the store. But the phone booth is yellow, and like the motif of the store is yellow, and so that's like his danger. But then she passes the guy in the red bike, and also the red ambulance, right? So like the red causes his death. So Lola dies in the first run, then he dies in the second run because he gets hit by a red car in the second run, right? So yeah, so like danger around Lola is always red and danger around him is always yellow. And then like in the last version of it, there's like the whole thing where like the bike is red and the bike is danger, but because it's not a lot of red, like Manny's able to overcome it and defeat the bike and walk off into the sunset, right? And the bag in the last run is gold. So the bag goes from red to green to gold throughout the course of the 3 runs. And it's like so the really cool thing is like in the third run, which is I think where the sort of thesis of the movie comes together is in the casino scene, where if you pay attention to what's happening in the casino scene, it's sort of Tykwer is kind of telling you what the idea of the movie is, right? And like how all the rules work. So there's a sense of like magical realism where she is able to influence the events in the world through her scream, which is cool. But if you notice, there's 2 things that are important about the casino scene. One is that she doesn't bet on red, she bets on black. And 2, she bets on 20, which is the number of minutes that she has to save Manny's life.
Oh, and 3, there's a guy who looks like Daniel Craig in the room.
So by the third run, so the second run, I think it's when we get to the point where she has remembered the thing about the safety on the gun. But in the third run, it's like her memory has become so internalized that the way that the reason she goes for the casino is that she kind of like puts everything that she's learned together in this like almost subconscious way. Bets on black, bets on 20 and wins. And that's what doesn't actually end up saving Manny's life, but makes them basically rich, right? Because Manny has figured his own shit out. And I think that's really cool because it's not hard. It's not like it doesn't take very much for you. Like the signaling of the red and the green and the yellow and everything else is sort of obvious if you just watch closely enough, and you don't have to interpret that. You don't have like you can enjoy the movie without any of that stuff, which is really cool. But it's also like it's not so he's not talking down to the audience. He's like, here's some really like simple symbols and go-to things that you can then sort of latch onto to figure out this other stuff that I'm saying. And he wants the audience to like get the cool philosophy stuff that he's dealing with. And I feel like that's another thing that we just don't see a lot of in this kind of filmmaking.
Well, I think what's kind of cool about that is that to bring it back to the game, like even like a video game metaphor, it's like the character, like if you do like a time loop, like we talked about in the intro, like Majora's Mask, like is so heavily inspired by, like directly inspired by this, right? But like,
yeah, it is.
The character does not get smarter, the player gets smarter. And so like Lola herself does not know what she's doing or why things are going smoother.
No, Tykwer
but like,
does. The director does.
The director does, and the audience does. And like we know that we need to get her to the casino quicker and like bet on black 20 and then have her scream, like screaming your way to success with the Lola method, right? Like she just like keeps screaming until she gets her way. Like there's I was thinking, I listened today to the Office Space episode from 2 weeks ago, and like Jen talking about the magical realism. Like there's magic in here too, that like she's able to scream until like she gets her way, like a petulant child, but like it also works. Like, there's no reason why it should work, but she turns, whatever, like $100 or whatever into $120,000, right? So it's fascinating to think about, like from the game. Like I didn't think about how much the opening, because we haven't really described, but like before we actually get to this like long expositional phone call, which in Run Lola Run the Jewels Run, it's just like, hey, pay attention to this because like this is going to explain the entire movie, and like if you miss it, you're going to be lost. But like before that, it's like literally people like soccer game. It's 90 minutes and there's a ball and everything else is theory. Like they're literally explaining within a game anything can happen.
Sure.
Yeah. And like whether it's a video game, like she's the protagonist that you're playing, like it's like a Grand Theft Auto kind of thing or whatever. The game thing, I didn't really fully appreciate how important the game elements and her as a character and the the NPCs around are.
But I think that's like, because if you want to look, because I feel like this film can be viewed both as a time loop, movie and as a multiverse movie, just depending on like,
Yeah, sure.
you know,
Yeah. It doesn't
whatever.
matter. Yeah.
But
It's irrelevant. Yeah.
but I feel like what makes it work as because I feel like, not that this is a criticism that's maybe uh given to this film, because it's kind of been like canonized, and a lot of like canon films are, oh, I didn't like it, but I understand why other people like it, and that's a lot, like people aren't brave enough to be like, I hated this because of this and this. Like no one at my school, even if they disliked Run Lola Run, they can't, like my conversations with them pretty much begin and end at like, I didn't like it, but I know why others do, because they
Well,
feel
because
like they
people are
can't.
cowards and they're afraid of hurting people's feelings.
But
And idiots.
yeah. But I feel like, to compare to like a more recent film, I feel like this and Everything Everywhere All at Once both kind of have like similar themes, similar ideas. And a common criticism with Everything Everywhere All at Once is that because it's a multiverse movie, there's always that chance of like, well, the characters we're interacting with don't really matter, because let's say one of them dies, they can just go to another multiverse or another thing. I feel like both Everything Everywhere All at Once and Run Lola Run kind of get around that issue by one, having you enjoy spending time with these characters, so you actually like them and you don't want to see them die, even though if you know that, you know, Lola could always run again, maybe. But at the same time, you don't want to see these characters get hurt, because there is kind of, you do have like that narrative tension where in Lola it's they need to get the money before the time is up, and in Everything Everywhere All at Once it's they have to defeat the I don't know, I feel like it's been out long enough where I could
It's
just
long
say,
enough, you can spoil it.
yeah, okay. The donut, the everything,
the everything bagel.
But the drama and kind of the character not motivation, but the character arcs are all on a personal level. So it's like, you know, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, sure, it's about trying to defeat this otherworldly force, but it's more about trying to reconnect these two characters. And same thing with Run Lola Run. It's less about like, obviously that you have the stakes of we need to get money so Manny doesn't die. But it's more about the personal journeys that these characters go on through their loops.
Yeah. Because I think one thing the movie does like really well is like it sets up that they are willing to do whatever for, especially Lola will do whatever for Manny, even if that means like her, you know, like a Bonnie and Clyde situation or whatever, right? Like,
and they also deal with their relationship issues, which is what like is the connective tissue of these three stories, right? Like through those three stories, which is like, again, what I said about the movie being a beginning, middle, and end, but like each of those is the same story, is also like part of what makes it work. Like the narrative structure of it, of beginning, middle, and end, is the same story three different times. But by doing those scenes that are like bathed in red light, right, in when they're lying in bed together and having those two different conversations, like the third act is the resolution of those things and the realization of them, right? So it's like what Jacob was just talking about, is that like it's not just a gimmick and it's not just the same thing over and over again. It's these three different variations of the same story telling another story and resolving another story that is the thing that connects these stories together, which I think is a very clever storytelling sort of framing.
Yeah, for sure. I also do want to say, like, one of my favorite moments in the movie that has nothing to do with that, but I thought of it a little bit ago, was sort of the benefits of sexism, right? Like in the second one where she robs the bank and they're like,
yes, I always forget about that scene. I'm like, oh shit, yeah. I always forget about that, and then I'm like, oh right, that's great, and that's very funny and clever, and like,
you see her like weighing the odds, like, how am I going to get out of this one? Who am I have to shoot first? And like, just
girl, get down,
get out of the way.
And we're looking for a threatening bank robber who's not, doesn't fit your description. A couple before we get to the end here, a couple of interesting bits of trivia about this movie that you may or may not know. I didn't know this until I stumbled across it. Is the opening narration, where before the soccer ball gets kicked. And also, I just want to also talk really quickly about the security guard character, who I think is great because like that is the character that is sort of the like magical
Like he
guide.
knows what's going on. Like he knows
Yeah,
more than
it's
anybody else, right? Yeah.
And I love that, like, again, it's one of those things where Tykwer just kind of like breaks the fourth wall, and it's just sort of like, here's this character who like knows what's happening, and you have no understanding of why, but he's the security guard, so like that's why he knows, because he's the security guard, and like he's guarding the security of this movie, and
he always has like this smirk on his face of like, I know what's
Yeah.
happening. It's just like the
and he's like, we
perfect
all have
little
bad
touch.
days.
Mhm.
Like it's okay. And all right, so I didn't know this, but the guy who does the narration at the beginning, where he's talking about, you know, the whole like what is life and yada yada yada. His name is Hans Peisch, or Peisch, and he is Germany's most popular fairy tale narrator.
Oh.
His characteristic voice is easily recognized by anyone who grew up with fairy tale records in Germany. So I guess he's the guy who you think of when you think of someone telling you like fairy tale bedtime stories. So that was obviously a
That's
intentional choice. The other interesting bit of information is that the actress who plays the blind woman, who seems to be a kind of omniscient character as well, I guess her blindness, the one outside the phone booth, whose blindness seems to be a way of her seeing all three of the variations of this at the same time. She is the mother of Moritz Bleibtreu, who plays Manny.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Cool.
That's cool.
So she is like she's like literally looking out for her son.
She is, and I guess she is actually a pretty famous German actress from the middle of the 20th century. So he comes from a showbiz family, I guess. And
Nepo baby, even in the 90s.
both his parents are actors. The woman who plays, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the woman who plays the mistress who reveals important information in all three versions of it, but different each time, was also the star of Tykwer's first movie. I think it's called Dear Maria. I should look it up. Anyway, so he's worked with her in the past as well, and she's a pretty well known German actor as well. But yeah, I love the scenes like the two of them, because I think that's another one of those, like, again, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but every character in this has a backstory that you kind of get, and I think that's great, right? Even if they're there for 5 seconds, like even the guy on the bike, you're like, I get who that guy is, and there's something about the performance and the way that it's characterized where you're just like, oh, I get the whole backstory there, and they're all just phenomenal. Even Herr Meyer, who again, another really interesting thing about the movie is that every single time, right, that in some way he obstructs. Is it Ronnie? Is that the
yes,
that Manny
Ronnie,
owes money to? Like no matter what, right? That's the one constant. The two constants are that the neighbor who's asking for shampoo and Herr Meyer, who in some way hits Ronnie's car, like one way or another, right? Is this constant thing that goes throughout. He has very little screen time, and I get who that character is too, and I think that's a really important part of what makes this movie work, is that every single of those minor characters, you're like, I understand their inner universe, and they're not just, even though they are pawns, they are just players on a chessboard. Like they're more than that, and it's a really cool trick that Tykwer's able to pull off there.
And like in the video game thing, it's like, I don't need to talk to this NPC because I've already like ran through their conversation tree or whatever. It's like, no, but they have other ways that they're going to interact, that they're going to come back later in the story. Like the guy with the bike just like eventually gives the bike to the homeless man who takes the bag, and like that becomes the way that he like is in a certain place that, you know, Manny can see him, and so on and so forth. So it all plays. And the movie you're thinking about before is Deadly Maria.
Deadly Maria.
Yeah, from 1993.
Yes. And what's the actress's name?
Nina Petri.
That's it. Yeah.
So, Jacob, we end every episode with two very hard-hitting questions. I think you said you were listening to a couple episodes. You might know these are coming, so you might have thought answers in advance. Or if not, you're like all of our other guests that are going to panic on the spot, and it's going to be totally fine. Do you have...
Jen.
Except for Jen, who's just like, I got answers to everything. I'm in New Orleans, partying my balls off. Do you have a favorite movie from 1999?
aside from this one.
Well, this is from 1998, so it doesn't count as exempt.
It is from I saw it in 99 and it came out in American theaters in 99. It's from 99. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to say Being John Malkovich or Perfect Blue, which kind of counts if you include like wide release and all that stuff.
Yep.
But like lots of really great stuff. I mean, like I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't want to, in case it aged poorly. When I was 12, I really loved the South Park movie.
Oh, well, stay tuned in 2 weeks for no particular
great
reason.
Segue, Jacob, because that might be the next movie we're covering.
Okay, well, I'm excited. I'll rewatch it by then, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on the podcast, because I went back in the last month and I watched some episodes of South Park. I think there's still some funny stuff. There's a couple jokes and situations that aren't great in 2022, but at least not to a 8-year-old Jacob versus a more developed, thoughtful person. But yeah, so the South Park movie I haven't rewatched, mainly out of fear. But I remember having a lot of fun with it when I was younger, which was 8 years ago. So,
well, as a sneak peek to next week, I watched it for the first time like 4 years ago, and I loved it. So I think and that was much more in the woke cancel culture era. Not saying that for good or bad, but it was not a movie where I was like, oh no, I can't tell people I like this. I'm like, no, I love this movie. So
yeah, okay, good. It's not like
I think you're safe in saying that.
So I have a lot of thoughts that I want to not say because I want to save them for our next episode. Which
I just want to
be covering this movie,
assuage the fears that we can openly and freely enjoy that movie.
It's not like the worst South Park probably has. Well, I know it's not the worst because I saw some episodes and there's some bad stuff.
Yes,
but
yes,
okay,
yeah. All I will say is that. And again, more on this next time, but the first time I saw that movie, I missed half of it because people were laughing so goddamn hard that like I missed half the jokes. And I had to see the second time because it was that fucking funny that like I was laughing and people were laughing and I missed literally half of what was funny about it. But good choice, and I'm what great weird timing that you would say that. So anyway,
well, I'll also hint at the future that this is our last live action film this season. So
that's a cool. That is a good hint.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah, there's lots of like Toy Story. I know you guys want to wrap up, but Toy Story 2, Iron Giant, like all that stuff is. So I'm excited to hear.
Never heard of them. Definitely not going to be the movies we cover.
And we're definitely not covering Iron Giant on Too Fast in like a month. We're definitely not doing that either. In the midst of our Vin Diesel lap. Oh no, that's going to be in January. Okay, so now a more difficult question, possibly, maybe not. Do you have a favorite movie of all time?
Yes. I mean, like, it's one of those things where I feel like depending on who I'm talking to, I'll change my answer. But I think the movie I've watched the most and that I've like loved the most is probably Come and See.
I've not seen that one. That is one of my glaring omissions. John, do you know Come and See?
I do know it, and I also have not seen it.
Okay, so when you guys do like 1985, the podcast, you'll get to that. But I'll also say, so I don't look like a pretentious film student, I'll also say that Frank Oz's Little Shop of Horrors has been like a all-timer for me for like since I first saw it.
Wait, didn't someone else say that, John? Because I also I want to follow it up with do you prefer the happy ending or the downer ending?
I feel like that was Logan.
It might have been.
Who was the other guest who was not born?
Which ending do you prefer, Jacob? The happy ending or the sad ending?
I like the happy ending. I do have kind of like nostalgia for the sad ending because the first time that I watched it, my mom pirated it for us, and she got the whatever you call it, like the director's cut. And I remember being terrified by even though because that ending very fun, even though it's like a bad ending. Bad not in quality, but bad as for the characters. and I was
Yeah.
like terrified of it. But this song, the Don't Feed the Plant song, is like an absolute, like, I think off of the entire soundtrack, that might be my favorite song. So like I have kind of like, I like the good ending more, but I've probably have seen the bad ending more times, just because me as a kid being fascinated by it, just like looking it up on YouTube and rewatching it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that's kind of cheating because I feel like you asked a very simple question for both, and then I was like, here are 2 or 3 answers for each question.
Well, then
Well,
my follow-up question to that is, when are you going to do Little Pet Shop Boys of Horror? How do I do this?
Little
Pet Shop Boys
Pet
of
Shop
Horror?
Boys of Horror. Of horror.
Horrors.
Pet Shop Boys of Horrors. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you, I don't think you can really replace a musical's music with another, but
Mhm.
maybe you could.
It's harder.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if either of you guys saw we just did Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Rocky Horror. Yeah.
And in that, a lot of people either did like remixes or they found covers of the songs and kind of, I don't know if maybe the same kind of, I mean, Little Shop of Horrors is a popular film, but like, I don't know if maybe the same type of musical culture surrounds that. I know there's like a Broadway version, but
Yeah.
I like,
Yeah.
I don't know if the songs are maybe as iconic as Rocky Horror, but I'd be down. I don't think I know there's lots of things happening. And I'd love to do Little Pet Shop Boys of Horror, but I just don't know if like right now it's feasible to squeeze another one in.
The last 2 weeks as we record this has been like almost like, I say this in the best way, like an obnoxious amount of new content. Like there have been like 7 new features debuted in the last 2 weeks. It's just like, who has the time to make all this stuff, let alone or watch it, let alone make it? Like, it's crazy. I will also say, like, John, I'll send you a bunch of links that you can put in the description. Like, if people want to check this out, like the Twitter accounts and just Twitch, like you can just set up Twitch notifications to push to your phone, like, oh, Exports is live, Segfest is live, DVD Division is live, or whatever, right? So like, you know, if you want to just check these out, because it seems like, or like Monday Movie Madness, like at least once a week, one of these things is live somewhere, so you can just like get a sense of like what these are and be there in real time.
Yeah, I mean, like I've definitely joked about it with them, where I'm like, it feels like we're speed running Burnout, because a lot of us have only been doing this for like 4 or 5 months now, and already we're like, you know, it'd be a great idea. We'll do 6 movies like in 1 month, because why not?
You got to learn from what Racer Trash. Like they all stop because they're like, why are we doing 7 of these in 2 months? Like,
I think a lot of us, because a lot of us are now like getting to know each other better and we're becoming friends. It's that kind of community thing that's very addicting. But yeah, I mean, we are slowing down for November. I think there's only 1 or 2 things. I think we're all kind of trying to keep that, like, where a lot of us will be like, yo, what about this idea or this idea? And then we're all kind of like, but all in the same month though, maybe not. And then we're kind of spreading things out. So hopefully, for the audience sake and ours, there probably won't be another glutton of 5 or 6 features, at least for a little while. But now that Joe, you've said Little Pet Shop of Horrors, I
I
might have to.
There.
Well, and Joey, I'll also say that, like, I get what you're saying, that because Little Shop of Horrors is a musical, that playing with the music doesn't seem like it's, feasible. I will argue though that like the music of Run Lola Run drives the narrative as much as anything else, so that like if you can play with that, then you can also play with like the music of a musical, like,
oh yeah, for
Little
sure.
Shop of Horrors.
And I mean, like, so many of the editors are just like crazy talented, and they blow my mind whenever I see anything they do. So I'm sure if I can't figure something out, I'm sure if I even put the idea out there, everyone else will be like, oh, I know exactly how to do this,
Explain before we go why Come and See is your go-to best movie.
Well, kind of like Run Lola Run. I watched it. In my grade 10 history class, we had to do an assignment on like pick a war movie and talk about it, write about it. And then I looked through the list and like the given list, and it was pretty much everything I've seen. And then I think the only thing on the list I didn't see was the Michael Bay Pearl Harbor movie, and I was like,
Oh, Jesus.
I don't want to watch that. So I pretty much, but I knew about Come and
You
See.
made a wise choice.
So I went up to my teacher and I was like, I know it's not on the list, but I really don't want to see Pearl Harbor, so I'll watch another fun movie instead. I'll watch Come and See. I'll talk about that. And kind of like Run Lola Run, it was just such a unique, like, oh, like you could make a war movie that doesn't make war exciting or entertaining in any way. It's very guttural. It's kind of like Run Lola Run. It's a story told mainly through visuals, and very, very powerful images. And I rewatch it once a year.
Wow.
Not really for enjoyment, but just for like, I don't know, kind of like nourishment almost, where I'm like, oh, like this is what movies can and should be, and this is what I want to like. Not that I want to do like Come and See too, but I want like this is what the
To come to see.
But this is like if you put enough forethought and like emotion and understanding into your art, like this is what you can make. This is like what I see as like the pinnacle of like sight and sound and moving images and all that stuff. I know. Sorry if that was like pretentious and very like
no, that's a great answer.
art person.
Absolutely not. No, we're gonna wrap it up. Before we go, would you like to direct anybody to anything that you're doing, or where they can find you on the internet, etc.?
Yeah, sure. If you want to keep up with like things that I'm doing, probably the best place would be Instagram. My Instagram account's just my full Jacob Meirovich put together, one word. And really the only other social media that I use is Letterboxd. And if you want to see the opinions of another cis white male film student, you could find me at Jacob Has a Letterboxd. And I think if you do end up putting the links to like the different like exports and SegFest, those people are also great to follow if you want to find some new, interesting, unique art, find a fun community to kind of hang out in, you know. Oh, I just got the notification from Joey who followed me.
Was that on Letterboxd, Joey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that's where you could find me.
Jacob, thanks for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Joey, as always, look out for frogs.
Look out for frogs and blame Canada.
Blame Canada, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.